Listen, I take exception to how the War of the Stepstones was presented in the show. And I know it's shocking that Rawrist would ever have anything to complain about, but like I say often, I hurt the things I love the most. Book versus show, the War of the Stepstones is a bit different. I would say the end results are the same and nothing is lost, but I love comparing and contrasting things, so I still want to go over the differences between book lore, so lore we're told about in the A Song of Ice and Fire books, Fire and Blood Volume 1 and World of Ice and Fire, versus the show, obviously just what we saw in Season 1 of House of the Dragon. So let's talk the War of the Stepstones, book versus show. First, the timing is off a little bit between book lore and show lore. In book lore, 𝐷aemon hears that Viserys is remarrying via a messenger who he then just beats the shit out of in a rage. This leads to him going with Corlys to fight in the Stepstones. Now, in the show, a messenger gives 𝐷aemon a message well into the war that Viserys wants to give 𝐷aemon resources to fight his war. This leads 𝐷aemon to going into a rage and beating the hell out of the messenger, and then quickly ending the war. I'm not saying 𝐷aemon couldn't have beat the hell out of two separate messengers. Certainly, the dude's a bit of a tool. I'm just saying I miss seeing 𝐷aemon beat the shit out of a messenger who tells him about his brother remarrying. So going back to the reason that 𝐷aemon left with Corlys to fight in the Stepstones.
We're both men who have had to cut our own way through the world. We've been passed over too often. Waiting in the Stepstones is a chance for you to prove your worth to any who might yet doubt it.
In book lore, 𝐷aemon is pissed that his brother is remarrying and Rhaenyra is his heir. Corlys is pissed that his daughter was passed over by Viserys, so they both decide to team up and to take on the three daughters and to clear out the Stepstones. If we go by show timing, it's likely Alicent becoming pregnant is what makes 𝐷aemon join up with Corlys to fight the war. Corlys, just like in book lore, joins because he's pissed at Viserys for, once again, turning away from his family. Which goes into the next big change that I noticed, and I've really wondered why they changed that. So there's a difference between support from Viserys and the War of the Stepstones between book lore and show lore.
I would urge that you not allow this triarchy much latitude in the Stepstones, Your Grace. If those shipping lanes should fall, it will beggar our ports.
The Crown has heard your report, Lord Corlys, and takes it under advisement.
In book lore, it's said Viserys supported 𝐷aemon and his War of the Stepstones from day one, just throwing gold and resources nonstop at his brother. And this is because Viserys is super jazzed that 𝐷aemon is occupied somewhere else and not in his hair, causing problems for the realm. In show, Viserys doesn't support 𝐷aemon until the very end, which is just odd. There were so many positives for show Viserys to support his brother's conquest.
The Crab Feeder is backed by powerful entities within the Free Cities who wish to see Westeros weakened. And the King's failures have allowed him to accumulate strength.
It was never my brother's strongest trait.
What?
Being king.
Again, I don't know why they went with Viserys not supporting his brother in show lore, but I don't know, here we are. Now, the general success of the War of the Stepstones is presented very differently between book lore and what we see in the show.
We have 16, perhaps 18 seaworthy ships. 700 foot, some 60 knights. Our food quickly dwindles, save for what we can fish from the sea. I would say we have a fortnight, perhaps a bit longer with strict rationing. I've made call for Driftmark to send more ships, but they will be weeks away.
In book lore, we have Corlys Velaryon leading his impressive fleet of ships and 𝐷aemon commanding the army and of course riding on his badass dragon Caraxes. In 106 AC, 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴, who had easily recruited men to fight in the war, spent the next 2 years winning victory after victory on the Stepstones and against the three daughters who controlled it. And oddly enough, in A Song of Ice and Fire lore, we're led to believe everything was going great for Corlys and 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴, and even King Viserys I, who was all about his brother being occupied elsewhere, like I said earlier, and was giving regular gifts of gold to support them. That's very different from this.
Lord Corlys and Prince 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 are losing their war.
Badly, by all accounts.
This is a plea for aid. Then why not send it?
Because it is a war started by two malcontents, unhappy with decisions I made.
We are led to believe in this show that Corlys and 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴's war is just going poorly. Now, I will say something fun that the show added was Lenore on his dragon sea smoke flying around and fighting in the War of the Stepstones. He's 15, so it makes sense he's at the ripe age to be fighting with his father in a war. It's just not talked a lot in other lore. To see it in this show was really cool, and I really enjoyed it. But regardless of how the war was presented or how it was going, book versus show, I now want to talk about Craghas Crabfeeder.
You've heard of the troubles in the Stepstones?
Some Mirish prince is feeding Westerosi sailors to the crabs.
They have the same backstory. They like to stake people on the beach, and the tide comes in and the crabs feed on them.
Fuck you, Prince Rhaegar. Fuck your whole mother and bastard father. No.
Just like in book lore, in show lore, in 108 AC, 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 kills Craghas Crabfeeder. However, in book lore, it's said that 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 just straight chops his head off, and the image that I can't show you because it's YouTube, it looks like 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 sliced him from shoulder down diagonally. It's not technically a beheading, but I'll still allow it. He still chopped his head off from the majority of his body. Also, nowhere in World of Ice and Fire or Fire and Blood Volume 1 is it written he did this by doing an over-the-top drama queen fake out. So this next part is interesting. This is what happens after 108 AC when Crabfeeder is killed by 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴. In 109 AC, 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 now controlled 2 of the islands in the Stepstones, with Corlys controlling the waters in between. Because of 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴's ego, of course, he declared himself king of the Stepstones and Narrow Sea, with Corlys even going along with it and placing a crown on his head. But not everything was easy peasy for them after killing Crabfeeder. In 110 AC, the Triarchy got some revenge. They sent a new wave of forces under a commander that was actually pretty good. And then Dorne, who wasn't too in love with the Targaryens and the whole attempted conquering thing, joined the three daughters to lay the smackdown on 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 and Corlys. However, as was the nature of 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴, he soon grew bored in the Stepstones in 111 AC and appeared unannounced at King's Landing during a tourney. So here is a huge difference. In the show, it seems like 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 kills Crabfeeder, he wins the Stepstones, and then he's like, alright, I'm out. Where in book lore, he stays for another 3 years and just keeps fighting on as the king. Now, how he returns is completely different from what we get in book lore. The show version of him coming home is really tamed down and disappointing. If you're gonna make 𝐷𝐴𝐴𝐴 this much of a drama queen, make sure you have all his drama queen moments from book lore. Also, given that Otto said that the Blacks control the Stepstones, I'm assuming they're not going to even continue any further with the Stepstones. I think that line was a way to say, hey, Blacks have control of the Stepstones, no point in dealing with that. Maybe there'll be a mention somewhere in season 2 or 3, but for the most part, I think we're done with the Stepstones and we're not really ever gonna see them again, so this was their way of just piecing out. Okay, so 𝑑aemon returning. In the show, 𝑑aemon just walks into the throne room, places his crown down, and reunites with his brother.
Add it to the chair.
In book lore, 𝑑aemon had to make it all about him. So even if you don't want the full details on 𝑑aemon's unannounced appearance in book lore, I'm still gonna describe it to you. Okay, so in book lore, 𝑑aemon shows up at a tourney wearing gold and silver and a crown, and he rides around on his dragon over the tourney grounds 3 times before landing before his brother, kneeling, taking off his crown, and giving it to his brother. Viserys I at this tourney was so pleased to see his brother and him showing some humility. He then gave the crown back, kissed his brother on both cheeks, and welcomed him back home. The crowd then cheered for the reunion and what was likely a burying of the axe between 2 brothers. Way different. And in book lore, he also seduces and sullies his niece and then pisses back off to the Stepstones. In the show, you know, not so much. And I'm not sure how they'll do it in the show, but after 𝑑aemon gets bored again, other kings of the Narrow Sea do rise up, kingdoms fall, and right before the dance, Otto Hightower tries to give the Stepstones to the Triarchy, but again, according to the clip by Otto, the Blacks have control of the Stepstones. Now that doesn't mean that Otto can't in season 2 still try to give it to the Triarchy, but it's not his to give apparently. Which actually brings us to the final portion of this video, which is, what do any of these changes mean? Why does it matter? Honestly, again, in the end, the end results, it doesn't matter. The Stepstones served its purpose. We got everything from it. I don't think it will alter anything too much. And kind of how they glossed over Dorne a lot in the main show, I think they're just going to gloss over any other involvement in the Stepstones in House of the Dragon. I think a better question for this is, why did the Maesters lie? So we know George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood Volume 1 and his World of Ice and Fire is written from the perspective of Maesters, and Maesters that existed for hundreds of years after some of these events, and even the Dance of the Dragons. So we have information that is different than what we're seeing in the show, which George R. R. Martin has said you can kind of see as the reality. So we have what's written by the Maesters, and then in the show, we're seeing what actually happened. And it's interesting to see what information is incorrect or contradicts each other. So for example, Viserys supported 𝑑aemon from day 1 with the War of the Stepstones in book lore, but not in the show. So why would Maesters change that? Why would they make Viserys look better by being like, oh yeah, he completely always supported 𝑑aemon in the War of the Stepstones and all his successes? We know that Aemma died during childbirth, but we're never told that Viserys forced a C-section on her. The Maesters didn't write that, and they write some pretty horrific things about childbirth and stuff. So, you know, there's a lot of information that was left out or altered, and it's fun to try to guess why. It seems like the Maesters made Viserys seem a lot better than what he was, and I kind of wonder if that was Viserys and his whole...
Responsible for this gossip. I will take their eyes.
So, okay, that is Stepstones book versus show. Overall, I was just so happy we even got the War of the Stepstones in the show. I was so worried they weren't going to do it because it just was sort of this side, I guess you could call it side quest sort of thing. So I'm so happy that they actually included the War of the Stepstones. So even though there were changes, it's more like, okay, why did you do this? Not a, you know, screaming, why did you do this? But let me know, what do you think? Do you like the changes that they made in the show? Do you wish they would have kept some of the book lore more in line with it? Like, subscribe, let me know in the comment section down below.